So what we try to do in this webinar series is to really explore the notion of knowledge in a world of AI. And we asked the question, what counts as knowledge? And you introduced the concept of epistemic agency with us, and you defined it as the capacity to evaluate, produce, use, and transform knowledge critically. And you illustrated this with an example from archaeology, which was very illustrative. And I recommend you to watch the recording if you haven't done it so far. And there you say, in this context, that students should position themselves with respect to knowledge as active learners, as users of knowledge, but also as contributors to society. I think this is the bigger idea of what higher education is about. And archaeology is a very specific topic. And we think there is a big thing in the disciplinary perspectives. This is why we invited disciplinary experts, and we are just very much looking forward to listening to what you see is knowledge and what you want to convey to your students. And in that sense, I hand over to Josh to introduce today's agenda and the speakers.
Yeah, so thank you. I'm Josh. Like Franziska said, I'm so happy to have you all here today. So today's session, as we said, we're going to have a snappy 60 minutes, and we are now at the introduction part. Then we will, and I will also introduce the panelists in just a second, and they then will give in like mini inputs of say 5 minutes each, brief insights into their disciplines. And then we will have a kind of panel discussion where the panelists can share their thoughts, and you, so as our expert on epistemic agency, can also chip in at any time. And then we will have an open Q&A where everyone can ask their questions and give their thoughts. But you participants can already post your questions in the chat at any time. And at the open Q&A, you can also use your microphone. And we will try to get through as many discussion points as we can. And then shortly before the hour is over, we're going to give an outlook to the next and final event of our series. Okay, so now I would like to, can you move? Thank you. Because this is the important part for today. Aside from the panelists, we gave them a way to prepare for the day, to structure their thoughts, perhaps. So we asked the panelists, who I will introduce in just a second, to reflect on their disciplines, focusing on 3 major themes or topics. The first one is epistemic culture or epistemic foundation. And in essence, what counts as knowledge in this discipline? How do we know something's a strong claim, for example, or a weak claim? Then second, a discipline's epistemic culture is also maintained and transmitted through teaching the next generation of students. So what are key learning outcomes in relation to epistemics? And how are students, the future disciplinary people working in this discipline, how are they taught and assessed? And lastly, where does this AI come in? How does it shape this discipline with respect to epistemics? Do practices need to change? And if so, how? Or maybe they're already changing. Okay, so now this is how we prepared them, and now we'll introduce them briefly. So first we have Professor Dr. Titus Neubert. He leads the quantum matter theory group in the Department of Physics at University of Zurich. So he is a Web of Science highly cited researcher in both 24 and 25, so safe to say he a researcher of ample pedigree to give us some disciplinary perspectives today. Physics is the natural science after which many social science fields are also modeled, and probably the prime example of what is called a mature science. So I'm looking forward to learning whether there is movement in how students are also epistemically prepared for this field. Next, we have Professor Dr. Jana Hastings. She's assistant professor for medical knowledge and decision support at the Institute for Implementation Science and Healthcare at University of Zurich. So she has a background spanning from Cape Town to Cambridge, and her work sits at the intersection of biomedical informatics and clinical decision support. So she can offer perspective on how knowledge in the health science is structured and ultimately put into practice in high-stakes environments where AI, I presume, is already making itself felt. And lastly, we have Professor Dr. Christian Mattis. He's a professor of history education at the Zurich University of Teacher Education. And his research examines how learners develop historical understanding and how they are able and learn how to critically interpret sources and narratives and evidence. So his perspective highlights a domain in which knowledge is not just found and uncovered, but also constructed and contextualized and also debated. So which again raises some fascinating questions about how AI might support and unsettle these practices of historical reasoning in students. Okay, so this was a very snappy introduction to our panelists, and now already we come to the section. I think I'm going to give over to you, Franziska, right?
Yes. I mean, just very briefly, I will hand over the word to you, Titus. And we agreed on that I will jump in after 5 minutes and ask a question, and you will close down your thoughts before we hand over to Jana Hastings and then to Christian Mattis. So we are very curious to hear what physics is about.
Very good. Well, good morning to everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to this discussion. I'm looking forward to this very much. Physics, of course, everybody knows physics from school, and the usual reaction I get when I tell that I'm a professor for physics is really completely bimodal distributed. One is I hate physics, I didn't know what it was about, and the other is either I love it or I have a brother who loves physics and knows something sort of deflecting. But anyways, let's jump in with the next slide, what I think we can say about knowledge in physics. I could make this very brief in a way because we have, if I could kind of go to the ivory tower and say, look, I have a very clear definition in some disciplines, at least in physics, what knowledge is. And for instance, if I look at particle physics experiments, the ones that are, for instance, conducted at CERN in Geneva, they are the biggest experiments that mankind has conceived. A huge ring of 27 kilometers that lets particle collide, and then there are detectors of the size of a big building, like the one you see here, which try to take to record the traces of those particles. And there is a definition in this field that says we discovered a new particle or we discovered a new interaction between particles or so. If we can make experiments, that's all statistical experiments, we repeat them many times. If we make it such that we would only have gone wrong in 1 out of 3.5 million repetitions of this experiment. So this is the 5 sigma confidence interval. That's the gold standard in this field. So there is a very quantifiable notion of knowledge here. That is an experiment. What you will learn as a student in physics very quickly is that there is a big divide between theory and experiment, like conceptually. In experiment, we try to find out, what happens in nature, in either explorative way or confirming theory. And in theory, we have axioms that are derived from experimental observations, but they on these our concepts reside, and we cannot prove them. We assume these axioms, but then the theory makes predictions which should be verified or falsified. So it's very clear that knowledge, as in a theory, is defined as something that makes predictions which we can which we've never falsified, let's say. And this is kind of a very clear-cut reductionist approach to describing the world. But then there is another thing at which physics is basically the basis, and that is this idea of emergence and emergent complexity, emergent phenomena. And there is a whole ladder of emergence. I cite here this a science article by Nobel laureate Phil Anderson, who says, okay, elementary laws of physics can bring about chemistry can, if you put many chemical constituents together, you come maybe to molecular biology, then you come to new concepts in each of these disciplines. Then you can come to the concept of life, then you go further and you go to the concept of consciousness, you go to social interactions. These are all new levels of emergent phenomena, and physics has basically the has the privilege of being, for one, at the bottom of this, but also we have provable examples of this this emergence. So they are kind of mathematically cleanly derivable, which at higher levels of emergence is not possible anymore. We cannot derive, it's just too complex of a phenomenon. We cannot derive something about consciousness or the living being from first principles. And now there comes the general question with this kind of emerging complexity, and that is kind of a current tension, I guess, also in the field, whether we should simply accept that some phenomena are so complex, and even physics phenomena in material science also, they're so complex that we will not be able to with a reductionist approach bring them down to a simple punchline, a simple theory that we can grasp with the with the complexities that our brain can deal with, or whether we just have to say, okay, they are so complex, we have to give this to a big AI or a big variational space of solutions and optimize without really knowing what's inside, without reducing it to principles. So that is essentially the tension, I would say, in physics between the reductionist approach and this idea of embracing complexity to describe nature and giving up on the hope that we can formulate a theory with equations that we can solve, at least in some cases, and so on. And on the other hand, it's a huge chance for AI, because then we are talking about, the complexity beyond what we can handle as humans without the aid. And of course, it becomes big data problems and things like that play a bigger role. So if you ask now, what should students learn? So unfortunately, I think that the learning path is really kind of such that at the bachelor level, I can usually only embrace the first half of what I talked about, the dialogue between theory and experiments, as well as the reductionist approach to looking at the world. That's something that students typically learn within the first few years, but to really be active as in knowledge producing, of course, you need to at least go to master thesis, and also this aspect of complexity and emergence is usually hard to transmit, at least in our current learning path in the first 2 or 3 years.
Thank you very much, Titus. This was very interesting and a first perspective where AI will jump in the game in teaching. We will raise this question in the discussion. So I'm happy to now hand over to Jana with a very different discipline, and just very curious to hear from your side.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Also, welcome everybody from my perspective. This is such an interesting topic and an interesting juxtaposition of very different disciplines with different practices of building up knowledge. Next slide, please. So in medicine, in the medical, this is good, stop here for now. So in medicine, knowledge is actually very difficult to come by, because we're dealing with a messy and complex world, messy and complex systems, which we do not have a full understanding or complete models of. And we're dealing with multiple levels in this idea of that the world can be split into multiple levels. We have kind of in medicine feedbacks between all sorts of different levels. People are at the same time physiological beings, as psychological beings, as social beings, and all of these different layers influence each other when it comes to health. So knowledge is very, very complex, or the type of knowledge we're looking for is about very complex systems in medicine. And we start with evidence, and evidence comes in different types. Evidence doesn't itself constitute knowledge, but it is the foundation of knowledge in medicine. And it starts with observations, and you can have observations which are single, which are about one person or one thing that happened. And these observations can give you some information. So we talk about case reports, and that's what this paper is an example of. But they cannot tell you causal information because you don't really know why you've observed what you've observed. Next example. When you want to discover something causal, you want to sort of try and intervene in the world and observe in a systematic way what happens, we typically design trials which are set up in such a way that we sort of randomly allocate people to one test or another test, one condition or another condition, one drug or another drug, one drug or no drug. And this allows us to, for the reasonable level of certainty, to decide that we think that the reason the outcomes were different between the groups was because of what we did. However, it's not perfect. You could imagine scenarios where all the healthy people ended up by accident in one group. So even trials don't provide certain knowledge. They just provide evidence of a different level. Next example. So there's a lot of work that goes on in medicine to try to put together all the different types of evidence about a single question, and this is called reviewing. And this is, I would say, the main pathway that leads us towards knowledge in medicine is systematic and comprehensive reviews of all the evidence which has been assembled on a given question. And this kind of reviewing process has to be somewhat critical or engaged with expertise, understanding, and awareness of the kind of problems that can happen in the evidence. Next slide, please. So there's a concept of a sort of hierarchy of levels of evidence. And you see here systematic reviews at the top, trials are just below systematic reviews. These are high quality evidence to answer a certain question because of the way that they are designed. And right at the bottom you have expert opinion, tells you something, but it could be extremely biased. And you also see next to it a list of potential problems with evidence. And I won't have time to go into all of them in any detail, but an example is a study may be biased. So for example, when there's a study trying to work out if a particular drug is effective to treat a particular disease, it could be problematic if that study is funded by the company that stands to or wants to sell that drug because they have a financial reason to want to show that the drug is effective. And we call this a bias. And this is in fact quite normal in the production of medical evidence, that there are biases going around all over the place. And otherwise, if there weren't these financial incentives to do things, we wouldn't have funding to do the very expensive research that we need to do in order to derive new knowledge in medicine. So we can't just take, the biases out, but it can happen, and it has happened in the past, that these biases have led to very low quality evidence becoming somehow pervasively accepted because contrary evidence didn't receive the support to show up and think problems like this. So these are the kind of problems with evidence, and they are why we don't count just any evidence as knowledge. Next slide, please. So typically, for any given question, you would have multiple studies because you need lots of evidence to come to a conclusion. And then you have a process where the synthesis process where you look at the whole lot of the evidence together in a kind of comparable way. And this is this process of systematic reviewing, and also critically engage with what might have been the potential problems with that evidence. And only then can you say that you have arrived at some knowledge and that this knowledge could potentially overturn previous knowledge. And here is my sort of closing example. It used to be commonly accepted knowledge that babies should be put to sleep on their stomachs because this was, there are lots of good reasons why it might be sensible, because the idea is, well, if they maybe throw up, they wouldn't then choke because they would be able to clear their airways lying on their stomachs and so on. However, studies, and you see here several studies, which over the years showed more and more consistent evidence for the fact that, in fact, there were greater health risks associated with lying on the stomachs. And by now, there's no expert that would ever argue against this overwhelming evidence, which has turned into knowledge. There is significant interest in using AI for all of the tasks related to producing medical evidence, doing experiments, and especially synthesizing evidence and turning it into knowledge. However, there are also problems, because a lot of our previously discredited, or if you have, let's say, reason from your new evidence to discredit a lot of previous knowledge, our AI systems are overwhelmed by the previous knowledge. So AI is driven in a way by the past. And this is something which we sort of have to critically engage with in the whole concept of AI for medicine. But that's something we will come to later. So I close with this now.
Thank you very much, Jana. So interesting and fascinating to see the differences. Would you like to also say just one word, knowing or being aware of evidence in the medical field? What would you want bachelor students in medical education to take away? What kind of perspective on knowledge?
So I think the most important thing in the medical education is to simultaneously help people to understand that we know a lot, but most importantly, we know very little. This fragileness of knowledge in medicine, and how we constantly are searching for better ways to study these very complex systems, and we haven't got perfect knowledge yet. I think this kind of epistemic humility is a very important position to be in when you're in medicine, I think.
What a wonderful term, epistemic humility. I suggest I hand over now to Christian with a third and very different perspective again before we start our discussion. Christian, the floor is yours.
Yes. Does the mic work now?
Wonderful.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to talk to you here. I'm very also humble in terms of my two colleagues presenting here with my contribution to this panel. But I was first of all I have struggled a little bit epistemically today, because I had to make a decision and to cut down what actually the knowledge I'm going to talk about. So I then decided first I will talk about what is history, because that is the foundation of then what is history in education. Next slide, please. First of all, we have to make a distinction, which is very important, that the past and history is not the same. The past is gone. The past is everything that has been before I'm talking now. It can be the start of this webinar. It can also be 100 years ago, and it can be 100,000 years ago. So this past is not accessible. So we can't go and pick up evidence directly, and we can't also repeat it. We can't resequence it, so we can't do experiments with the past. So history is always a construction of the past, or of changes over time from a present perspective. And this interpretation always has the form of a narrative. This concept of narrative is a very inclusive term. Means it can be a picture, it can be a movie, it can be as academically written narrative about the past. It can be also a TikTok post. So every time somebody creates meaning, a meaningful story about change and about why, or about what happened before, how it's now, and how it's changed, we call that a historical narrative. That means that historians also ask questions about the past from the present. So they have a certain cultural and social, economic, racial, ethnic, also gender position if they ask the question. But historians, actually, the ideal historian, reflect on their interest of knowledge and their concepts, and also and above all, they are aware of this distance between the past and history, and they address it if they create a narrative. So, and it is precisely this distance that research has shown that students at all levels, from kindergarten to university, lack sometimes or have problems to overcome this distance, and they are stuck in the present. For instance, I can make an example. If you encounter a story about the past, a narrative, you immediately judge. For instance, you say, "Oh, that's awful. A young girl has to be put in a convent by her father. That's awful." A historian might say, "Yes, from a present perspective, with the value of free will and asking children what they want to do in life, that can be said to be awful." But if you look at it as a historian, you would say probably, let's ask what was really maybe also in it to be stuck in a convent. And you can show that probably that gave women in the Middle Ages a lot of freedom. So they were taken out of pressure of being objects of kinship or family family politics. So and they also could study, they could learn, they could read and write. So you see, then you have you have probably the same judgment, but it is more complex, and you have immediately an argumentative way of putting the judgment. So next slide, please. So, and on top of that, history as a discipline is an ill-structured domain. That means our concepts in the hierarchical vertical dimension is not always functioning, because sometimes if you use a concept as, for instance, revolution, that could be a narrative abbreviation, as we say, that could tell a whole story, you know, in a certain context. But it can also be only a term that says that a society changed, or it can be a concept to predict something that is happening in the present. And it can also be a highly judged concept in terms of its progress or something. So there have to be certain epistemic acts. So you have to say, as a learner, you have to recognize the perspective, the respective conceptual domain you're applying. Am I talking now as an everyday person, for instance? Do I want to make a quick narrative in terms of explain something, or do I really want to address sources, to address different concepts? And then you have also always to ask, who is actually the author? Normally in everyday life, and a lot of students on the way, and even historians, they don't ask who is the author. But that's important, and from what position is he writing, or she? And then very important also in terms of AI, it is important to ask what is missing, who is invisible, whose voice is not present. Next slide, please. So how to encounter this? So historical theory, which is on the basis of history education, has come up with this idea that there are some second-order concepts which can help people to think more better historically. So you see the concept here, continuity and change. There are different tempi of change, different directions, multi-layered time levels. You have to address the historical significance of an event. You have to ask what was actually the source to give ground to a narrative. You have to ask what is actually the cause, and is there even a consequences to this cause? For that, is it a cause at least, or is it just an event? Yeah, and so on. And you also have to address what is actually similar and different in terms to the present, what is actually reminds us in terms of that's identical to our world, or there is a huge alterity. And on the bottom, on the left, you have to then that brings you to historical interpretation, and so that it has a two-directional way of thinking. First, you have a reconstruction and a deconstruction dimension, and they are interlinked. So if you encounter a narrative, you have to you have to deconstruct the narrative. You ask who's the author, on what evidence is it, how is continuity and change addressed, or if you create a narrative, you have to ask, can I say it in this way because do I have enough evidence to tell it like this, or do I make it monocausal in this way, or do I have other causal? Can I make it multicausal, and so? And to end, if we take into account AI now, we are just at the beginning of understanding what that means to the historic discipline, and also to historical learning. But the problem with AI is, and that is not a problem negatively, it's a challenge, is that an AI provides us and students with linguistically and also grammarly very well done narratives. So the argumentation is clear in the AI text, and also the shape which a narrative has is actually coming to you in a way that it's very convincing, and that is the first problem, because it's we have research that students at all levels are very very much convinced of these narratives, that they are good, that they are excellent, and then so we have this construction dimension. We have to elaborate on AI text, but with AI text, there's also another dimension which is coming in, and that is what Jana said. It's coming from the past, so it's the algorithms and also the information which was fed into AI is coming from the past. So it's not only to put it negatively, it can be sexist, it can be misogynist, it can be racist, it can be exclusive, and that also has to be taken into account.
So may I jump in here and ask you to close down?
That was my last sentence.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We now have a wonderful panorama of disciplinary perspectives, and I hand over to Josh now to discuss what's up here. I saw that already in the chat. You had a comment. I'm just very interested to see how we start from here.
Yeah, I'm gonna give over because I made a lot of notes and I thought this was really fascinating. So I took a few like keywords from medicine, the fragility of knowledge and epistemic humility and the importance of that. In physics, the tension between the emergence of complex systems and the modus operandi of physicists and how it is usually taught, so in the reductionist approach. And lastly, in history, the critical gap between the actual past, which is inaccessible, and history, which tries to uncover it or reconstruct it. So this, I think, truly fascinating and a lot of access points for discussion. And yeah, I'm just curious to hear, for example, how successful do you think are university or higher education programs in fostering these key insights? So what are they doing, and are they doing it well at this point to prepare students for these complications, for these challenges? And I'm just going to open the floor to you if you want to weigh in, dear panelists, and I will just be quiet now for a second.
Okay, maybe I can just say start there. I think we're not doing this well. That would be my thesis. So I would say that we are really stuck in a different past, right? Not in the historical past, but in a didactic past. However, it's also really difficult. It is a real challenge to teach these let's say epistemic agency, or to enable someone to be an agent, really, because it has in it that you need to act, and to act you need room to act, and room to act is actually a scarce resource. We have to it starts with the fact that if I don't want to talk to an AI, but actually have a discussion, that is one of the most expensive ways of teaching, because it needs a one-on-one or one on a few settings. No, I cannot teach this in a classroom with 100 people. I think most of the concepts that I would consider kind of key to epistemic agency, I think the students actually only learn it as either in their master thesis if things go well, or as a PhD student, at least in physics, I would say. And I feel that my generation is quite privileged in that we did learn all of these, questions, critical thinking, and becoming, researchers and so on. That we learned that without AI, and now we can leverage using AI. We can leverage this and be way more efficient. But it is a real challenge. It's like with the question of whether you should learn how to calculate without a calculator. And of course, we do that still, right? Like the students first learn how to calculate without a calculator, and then for the rest of their life, they use a calculator, because then they have a concept of numbers. They can estimate, magnitudes and so on. And I know this parallel has certainly its weaknesses, but I see that we have to think about this knowledge, this leveraging of AI in a similar way.
Can I say so? Yeah. I would say, just in the beginning, I don't think we do it well at the moment. But what I think is we have to use IA. For instance, in history, we have to use IA to create narratives. The students have to use it. And then we have to compare what kind of narratives come out of the machines and how to make it better. And what we can see, they are quicker in terms of having a narrative. So we are saving time there for the deconstructual part and to compare what could be a narrative for the classroom. How could you tell what happened, for instance, in the Roman era or whatever, and then you create with the IE this narrative. And then what actually is great in our field for instance, primary education, if you have a narrative you want to tell and make it more easy linguistically, and that is something the machine does very quickly. Like for instance, yeah, I know it's more complicated, but to make it say it easy, like do it in the European language level on A2 or whatever, or put it into easy language, and then you have another text that you can work with this, and that is actually huge. I think it's a benefit out of IA. Yeah. So that if I compare to you, I couldn't do that. I would probably we would have become different historians, but not better, but would have been very different for us.
Yeah, if I may jump in, I think the question of how education needs to change is a very interesting one, and part of it is a human challenge. So certainly in medicine, it has been historically a very hierarchical discipline where a lot of status attached to expertise and knowledge, and the disruptive nature of systems that ask the students to engage as agents have met sometimes with cultural resistance. And I think this is something where change may be slow because it's also human change. And on the one hand, you have people who are very enthusiastic about the potential for AI to solve problems in medicine. And on the other hand, you have resistance for good reason as well, and doubt about the claims that are being sold about what AI will be able to do for medicine, given the fact that AI only can work from data, and our data is so messy in medicine. So I think all of these conversations are happening in parallel, and the students may encounter very different perspectives on whether AI is a help or a hindrance for medicine, depending on who they speak to. And they also may encounter very different messages about how they are supposed to learn, either quietly listening from some lecturers or being engaged. And I think at the moment that must be very confusing an experience to encounter as a student.
Thanks so much for sharing these perspectives. Again, I find this quite interesting. This human component also of changing teaching and how we think about teaching future students or future professionals. At this point, Juuso, if you have anything you want to latch on to, you see important connections, if you can tie it back to epistemic agency from the first session, feel free to do so. If not, we can also just continue with this, but I'm happy to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I do have a couple of thoughts. Thank you so much for all the panelists. I have been writing 2.5 pages at the same time and drawing and trying to make sense of my thoughts. So let me try to do my best to synthesize some of these ideas. I think in all of these 3 cases, what I find interesting is there are 2 realities. One is the world of research, the actual knowledge production, which is, as we just learned, quite different in these 3 different disciplines. How researchers produce knowledge that ultimately, or evidence that finally constitutes knowledge. Sorry, Jana, you really made me conscious about this difference here. Researchers produce this body of knowledge, and then we ask our students to engage with this knowledge and build certain types of relationships with this knowledge. And now AI plays a role in how that body of knowledge gets produced. But then students have their own realities where they engage with that body of knowledge using AI in rather different ways than how AI is used in academic knowledge production. So connecting these worlds to me seems like like a meaningful act to do. And my question to all of you would be, in the programs that you're teaching in, do the students have opportunities to see how professionals or academics use AI to produce knowledge? And or do students get experiences of actually taking part in these professional practices by using AI to really feel what it feels like to be a future professional in that particular discipline? Does this make sense?
It makes sense. I think that We are just too slow to adapt our study programs to this. But it slowly comes. I think there is a difference between like what you can be exposed to as a student if you are looking for it, because there are a lot of voluntary offerings in the course program that actually address these things. And we've been starting these over the last couple of years. I do not think that in the compulsory core of at least physics education, or the same goes probably for many other natural sciences, that there is a strong AI component, but it's just about to come up now, and we definitely have to talk about that. And so at the higher level of studies, at the master level, for instance, also we do this quite actively. So in my group, we have a journal club where we discuss papers every week, and at the beginning of this journal club, we always have now a little AI session where people can present some sort of best or worst practices, something that they feel like it's worth sharing, how they used AI or whatever they encountered in the news or so. And I think that is kind of at least the way to raise awareness what is possible and where the limitations are. So yeah, yes and no.
Yeah, I can add that in medicine we are or have been in the last years trying to introduce such courses, as Titus says, mostly in the optional track, but very recently the University of Zurich also started to introduce an AI class in the mandatory curriculum for the medical training, and I think this goes in the right direction in terms of bringing knowledge about AI in medicine to the students. This is a little bit different to whether students are using AI in their own education. This is a little bit left to them, I think, to figure out how to use it as a conversation partner to check their understanding of things. And here, I mean, I don't think anybody really knows what the impact of that is yet, or whether it's truly beneficial or, on the other hand, harmful. Medicine is a field where the students have to memorize a lot of stuff. So knowing that these answers can always come from this machine is in a way detrimental to memorization, and yeah, could be difficult or challenging for the students, even in terms of motivation.
Yeah, one thing I already mentioned, like make text easier, for instance. That's something AI can. Then we also can show students how to, for instance, how the machine analyzes a picture, and then see did I see the same or something like this. And then also we can also, there is AI translating old writing, handwriting. If they do that, for instance, what has school looked like in the age of my grandmother. That's a typical topic in primary school, Swiss primary school. For instance, if they look at the specific school they are going to teach, what actually are the sources, what kind of evidence do they find to learn the story or to teach the story of the school to their kids. They encountered handwritings or postcards or even the teachers who wrote in Sütterlin about school life. So that could be translated within a second with the machine. That's excellent, and it makes it even more accessible than before. So only to stick with the positive one. It can be also empowering and encouraging to do it. So that's what I experienced in one case. That one student said, I couldn't imagine to do it now, but now I could translate, and then I can read it myself. I see what's in it, how beautiful, how interesting this source is. So that's a positive position.
Maybe I can just add two more things. So one, we conducted a survey at the University of Zurich. I think it's already almost 2 years ago now. So after the launch of the first ChatGPT hype, let's say, and it was an overwhelmingly large number of students that use actively large language models to support their studies. So if anything, then the teachers are behind. That's not saying that they use them well or that all the problems that Jana has mentioned are obviously there. We don't know. But the fact that they use them, I think, is certainly true. The other thing that when ChatGPT first came around, I thought, okay, it's now a problem for all of the disciplines that produce a lot of text, but that's not so. It's as much a problem for physics, for instance, or math also. So these large language models are extremely good now at logical reasoning. They also have their flaws, and it's extremely hard to detect these flaws for a student sometimes, as was mentioned previously, right? So it's really difficult to debunk because, as Christian was saying, it comes in very nice streamlined language. But definitely they can do. They're really at the forefront. We are actually I've been involved in trying to make a benchmark of physics problems that the AI cannot solve at the moment. The large language models cannot solve. That would be like graduate student problems, graduate student level problems. And it was really hard to make such problems that fail at the moment.
Thank you. That's great. I have to say, I also really appreciate the distinctions between using AI for research, for professional practice, and then on the other side, using AI for learning and teaching purposes. And these are two different things. But we also have to introduce students maybe to how to use AI, not for only their learning, but also how they might use it in future as professionals, as research. And I think these might take two different approaches, but might be intimately connected. I want to, as we are really already getting to the 1 hour mark, I do want to open the floor to also some chat questions. And we have one from Wouter Sandersy. And I'll just read it real quick. The three speakers talk about disciplinary knowledge in terms of explaining understanding, but there are also commonalities which you see across these disciplines. For example, taking epistemic perspectives, epistemic humility, and maybe also courage and honesty. Many academic studies educate future professionals who also need a kind of practical wisdom. So my suggestion is to answer these questions. What counts as knowledge in a much broader way? So in terms of these virtues around epistemic topics or epistemic perspectives in a way. This also has consequence for the perhaps limited role that AI may play in the university. So yeah, talking about these virtues, epistemic virtues, I think this is something that we did see across disciplines in a way, a critical stance, positioning yourself in a critical way towards the way knowledge is also produced. And I'm looking at some more comments. If you see anything you want to react to, please feel free.
I could briefly respond to this remark. I think it's very important in medicine because indeed part of the medical training is practical training, and this part, the kinds of practical knowledge, embodied knowledge that doctors and clinicians need to have, only a small part of this can actually translate into text, and this text part can then be used in AI. But the physical parts, like literally sensing and observing another human's health through all your senses, we haven't got AIs that can do that. Even though we can measure lots of things, and maybe in some areas we can measure more things than humans can observe. There's many dimensions which humans observe that we cannot yet measure. And so it's you have both. You have the fact that humans are much better than AI systems in some ways, and in other ways that AI systems are much better than humans.
There is there's a change. I think within within our discipline, we kind of observe over the last 5-6 years, and it is also pushed with AI, not only but also with AI, and there is the ethic component. The ethic component comes, the ethic dimension comes, is put on the forefront of everything. So what is actually the good in using this knowledge, and what is actually how is it just to present it in this way? And that is something which is maybe for me the most important. If it comes, I wouldn't say like, and from there the question of virtue jumps in.
Okay, so we're already, this is it's kind of unbelievable that we're already pretty much at time, and I'm a little sad to say that I think we have to already like close up, because we want to end this after 1 hour. Now we're going to export this chat. We're going to give you the recordings. It will be available for all of us today, and we will try to connect this in the third session, but I'm going to let Franziska speak on that and to wrap up this session for today.
Yes, I have been just very attentively watching the chat, and many of the questions that raised there connect to the question that have already been posted in the first webinar. For example, Franziska, your question about the normativity. So what we plan in moving ahead in January is not to invite any more speakers, but really have a conversation in breakout sessions amongst ourselves in our very situated practices. What is it that we want to do? How about, we have been talking about affordances of the learning environment. How can we create a learning environment that fosters active engagement, that fosters not only the reproduction, but also the production of knowledge, and make the connection to society and the role of students to society. So what we suggest is that we take the questions from the chat and use them as a starting point in January to really have a discussion. What does it mean for your very individual practice as teachers in your discipline? So in that sense, I just would like to thank you so much for these wonderful contributions from these disciplinary perspectives. Christian, Mattis, I would love to learn more about history. I think for everything we do, a historical perspective is important. Medical education, in a way, is so close also to teacher education. Jana, this has been really intriguing, and epistemic humility will stick with us as a term, I think. And Titus Neupert, I will never say again I hate physics, and I never hated it, but I think there is so much to learn also from your perspective, and it's been very, very rich. And I didn't expect that we would be really in time, as you have been just doing a wonderful job in putting it to the point. And I just really also would like to thank you, Juuso, for not only sharing your comments in the audience, but also in the chat. And we very much hope to continue the conversation with all of you. So in that sense, thank you so much for being with us, and have a wonderful day, and hopefully to see you in January again. Thank you very much.